Okay, and I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. I've been trying to figure out how I could shake this up a little bit because it's being first up after coffee break in the afternoon, and I'm not presenting about the region. I'm not from the region, even though I did work for a while in Barbados. I'm from Canada. I'm a tourism professor, and I'm not even from Toronto. But I can promise you that there are going to be some nice little linkages here to discover in terms of what I'm going to be talking about, engaging new audiences by bundling together experiences. Okay, sorry, I just have to get used to this. I usually use the computer. So basically what I'm going to look at here is how museums can develop new audiences by taking their art out into the urban environment, particularly of our cities, their art and their activities. So I have a little bit of a literature review. I have 3 case studies that I'm going to present from the city that I'm from, St. John, New Brunswick, and along the way I'll tell you a bit more about St. John itself. And then a little bit of analysis and discussion, so we'll try to get some lessons that are useful for you from these case studies. So in terms of the literature review, and don't worry, I only have 2 slides of literature review. Being an academic, you've got to do this. But the first slide is just to say that there's been a lot of literature out there about art, public art in the urban environment, and we know that there are a lot of benefits. I mean, it can contribute to, we see art differently when it's out of doors. For example, with our sculpture garden here, we can see it in a different perspective because it's out of doors, and there are lots of contributions that public art can make to urban regeneration, to creating a better standard of living, quality of life in urban cores. And you remember, we used to say, and there's quite a dated reference there to 1989 about museum and gallery exhibitions being static. But now as we reinvent the museum in kind of a post-museum context, by taking art out into the urban environment is one thing we can do to engage with new audiences and more diverse audiences, and perhaps bring those audiences then back into the actual institution. So the second slide I have regarding a literature review is just to talk about the concept of bundling experiences together into a product, which is essentially what Peggy, and thank you very much for that presentation, was talking about in terms of the Maritime Heritage Trail here. So bundling is just where you take a whole bunch of individual components and you put it together into a trail, a walk, an event, and all of a sudden it becomes a product for people to experience. And of course, a particular interest for heritage tourism. So we found that, and my colleague Hilary DeCrow and I wrote a whole book, actually, 2014, about the arts and events that was published with Routledge. And we had earlier on, we had looked at, mainly in an urban context in Asia, we had looked how different art components were bundled together in terms of studio tours or studio open days. So this is happening increasingly, that we're looking for ways to package art components in the urban environment so that they actually become a product. So my 3 small case studies that I'm going to introduce you to in a minute are from St. John, New Brunswick, which is the city I'm from. So just in case you're wondering where it is, it's in the same time zone that we're in here, so that was great for me. So yes, imagine that. So just directly north, right? If you look up in this little corner of what we call Maritime Canada, which includes Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, and New Brunswick. If we add Newfoundland, then we call it Atlantic Canada. So St. John is actually, and you can see it right here. I'll tell you a little bit more about the context of St. John before I actually get into the three small case studies. So St. John is actually quite an old city in the Canadian context. So it was the first incorporated city in Canada, 1785. And it was essentially, it was the United Empire Loyalists. So at the time that you had the American Revolution, it was the people who were loyal to Britain and came north that founded our city. We actually had, sorry, I'm quite short, so yeah. We actually have Canada's first public museum in St. John, the New Brunswick Museum. But we also have a very historic city center, which has been recognized. The Prince William Streetscape was recognized as a National Historic Site in 1981, and the Trinity Royal Conservation Area was recognized in 1982. And some of these buildings behind the big pink bus are, you see this building on the corner, are part of that conservation area. This little statue here is one of our pieces of public art by a local artist, John Hooper. Very popular because you see a lot of people around there. But the one, I don't know how well you can see it there, the one little man in the middle is actually part of the statue. So people will cluster around there for pictures. And of course, the reason there's a pink bus there is that we're also a cruise port. So we share a lot in common with your location here. Here's another picture of one of the historic streets in the Uptown. A little bit touristic because I took the photographs from Discover St. John, which is our local destination management organization. So we're a port cargo cruise city. In fact, any of your ships that come here, you have cargo ships that come from, your cargo, if it came from Canada, it probably came through St. John. It probably would have been sent to Miami and then offloaded onto smaller boats. So we're the major port in Eastern Canada. And we do have a cruise, like a very active cruise industry, although it's very seasonal. So really running just from about May until the end of October. But we're actually on the same ocean as you are. So the Atlantic Ocean, we're an inlet. The Bay of Fundy, which has the highest tides in the world, is a little inlet of the St. John River. We're the largest city in St. John. And interestingly enough, when I was putting this together, our population is a little bit higher than Grand Cayman. In 2011, it was 70,000. But our city density, does that look familiar? This is very similar to what you have. 221.8 kilometers, 574 square miles. There might be a little bit different. So that gives you an idea of the scale. Our city is quite spread out because it's on a port. You know, in fact, there are two harbors in our city. But okay, so the three little case studies I'm going to talk to you about, and I have some brochures here that correspond to these, if you want to pass those around, are, first of all, the Art in Public Places Walking Tour, the St. John Gallery Tour, and Sculpture St. John. And when you see some of these brochures, you'll also notice there's a French side, because actually New Brunswick is the only officially bilingual province in Canada. Quebec is French, the rest is English, but we actually have a mixture of, St. John is English, we also have an Acadian population. So I just have a couple of slides on each small case study, and then I want to do a little bit of a comparison and draw some conclusions. So this Art in Public Places walking tour was actually developed by the local destination management agency, so it was developed for a tourism purpose, but it's available to local people as well. And it's actually available in print, PDF on their website, and there's also an app that visitors can download. So it looks at both outdoor and indoor art, public art in spaces within the city, and it incorporates some of the public art created by Sculpture St. John that I'm going to talk about in a few moments, and it also lists galleries and studios that people can visit 3 times a year on my next case study, which is the St. John Gallery Hop. So there's the public art walk. You can see it's quite compact, just in the center core of the city, and it also does, there's the John Hooper sculpture we saw before, but it also, this is one of the sculptures that was developed by the Sculpture St. John Symposium, I'll talk about in a few minutes, and it lists these other small galleries and studios, so right in the center of the city. So the second case study, the St. John Gallery Hop, and it happens 3 times a year, and that's a partnership of public galleries, but then small commercial galleries, and they hold all of their exhibit openings together over about a 4-hour period on a Friday evening, and actually this coming Friday evening is their fall gallery hop. So people can wander, it's a free event, and that characterizes a lot of these cases. People can wander from gallery to gallery in the urban core and see what's happening. So this is really a bundled product that provides an arts experience, possibly developing new audiences, although I don't have any data other than approximate visitor attendance and having participated myself, and I think it's mostly a core audience of people who go all the time. So here are a couple of pictures from a few years ago of the gallery hop. Trinity Galleries, one of the commercial galleries on the right. The Jones Gallery, very small studio gallery. And actually, interestingly enough, this artist, Sarah Jones, has recently had a pop-up gallery in the suburbs that she ran, in an empty storefront for maybe a week or two, where she had an exhibit of her work, and she also had talks where school groups and things could come in. So she's trying to broaden her audience by going into the suburbs. Now the third case study is of an event called Sculpture St. John, which is an international sculpture symposium. So it's based on a European model that dates back to the late 50s that started in Austria, where sculptors would come together in one place and they would produce sculptures that were then left in the local community. So that was kind of their legacy and a way of extending the reach of public art. So this has happened, as you'll see by the brochures that are going around, this has happened every other year. It's happened 3 times now. So 2012, 2014, and 2016. So it just finished September 17th. So it provides education regarding making sculptures and public art. And it also connects the communities that surround St. John via affordable public art. Because when these sculptures are finished, they go out into local communities. Okay, that's fine. I only have a couple more slides here. So case study comparison. This is where I want to see if we can get some lessons here. So what I've learned from this, and this is interesting because I've studied a couple of these events in a different context. The public art walk is certainly the most accessible art experience because it's always available, right? Through the brochure or through the app. It's free. The gallery event hop is free, but I'm not sure it's attracting any new audiences there. You can see the approximate attendance per event there. The sculpture St. John is free, but actually I think it's been most effective at attracting new audiences, because when we did a visitor survey in 2014, we found the majority of the people coming were local, because it's a 6-week event. It's open every day of the week. The sculptors are there on the site. People are engaged and they're coming back to see it, which is important in our city because we actually have one of the highest poverty rates, especially for child poverty in our inner city. So it's important to expose young people to the art in an accessible way. So these are the lessons that I've drawn here of successfully taking art out of the museum and gallery settings into the urban environments. One of the most common things seems to be is that these events are free, right? When I initially wrote my abstract, I was going to look at the New Brunswick Museum has a public art walk, but it turns out they only hold that a couple of times a year and they charge admission, right, for that. The second thing is that by bundling art components into an accessible experience and product, you know, if it's an art walk or a tour, a gallery hop, or a sculpture symposium, that in itself makes art more accessible, possibly encouraging new audiences. And the last conclusion is that there are these strong partnerships. If you think back to the partnership of the public galleries and the commercial galleries in the city working together, and in pioneering approaches to bringing art to new audiences outside of the museum, not within traditional museum walls per se. And we do have, in addition to the New Brunswick Museum, we have the St. John Arts Centre, which would act kind of like our art gallery because it's city-owned and city-run. And I think a lot of these initiatives are driven by the city actually has a cultural officer. So there's the references, and questions, which I look forward to. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much. I am going to open the floor to questions, but I just had a couple of comments as well. I've been very inspired by a similar concept in the Bahamas and in Nassau, where they do transforming spaces every year, which is a similar kind of idea. It's, I think, about 6 different organizations collaborate together. And again, it's this public-private gallery effect. And we are looking, or I am looking to try and recreate a version of that in Cayman early next year. But I think we did have something in the Cayman Islands that was very effective for a while, which was a little bit different, but it was called the Passport to Culture or Passport to Art, and it was a way of combining some of the bigger national entities, really from a tourism angle, because we were very disconnected from the tourism product. So taking those concepts that you've illustrated today, and potentially even for us in Cayman, reconnecting, whether it's Cayman Turtle Centre or whether it's Pedro St. James, the National Gallery, the National Museum, and kind of bringing that product back together to market for tourism, and have a lot more strength and profile within doing that. So that's a great call to action, I think, from your presentation for us working in the Cayman Islands.
Oh, thank you. Well, a cultural passport would be a similar concept.
Yeah.
You know, having a passport and then people can get a stamp at each place.
Yeah, so that's how it used to
you know, maybe they can hand it in at the end for a print or something.
A free something. Okay, I'm open the floor to questions. So we have one over here.
It's sort of a two-parted-ish, or maybe it's not. I was wondering in terms of the, you said the gallery hop is free and the one at the actual museum isn't. Do you get like the same amount, or do you get a similar amount of people that show up to both if one of them does cost money? Or even like at the gallery hop, do you find it's more families that go to those things, or is it more just like the adults if it's later at night? Like I know in New Orleans we have people going to the galleries, but it's typically adult members because they want to leave their kids at home, and then in the daytime, that's when more kids go with them. But I was just wondering, like, culture-wise, like where you are, how that works.
Well, I think the way the gallery hop works is it's from 4 till 8 p.m. And all of the public galleries are open from 4 to 6 p.m., which would fit in with their traditional opening hours. And then the private galleries are open from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. And I think it's mainly an adult event because it's also boosted the business of a lot of local restaurants because people will go to the gallery hop and then go to the restaurants and things. The public art walk the museum holds, and as far as I could find out, I think it's only a few times a year, but it would be a guided interpretive walk with an interpreter. So quite different, with an interpreter from the museum, and not as accessible if they're only doing that a couple of times a year. They did this summer run walks every day, but they were more general with museum admission. So did that answer your, Charlotte?